Welcome back to the Smartbuild implementation series. We're in part 9, slider doors. So we have this project here in front of us, and we have some sliding doors, a split sliding door and a smaller hayloft door up here at the top. And this is going to be the first type of slider door we focus on in this setup. And sliders can be a bit confusing and how to set them up in Smartbuild. We get a lot of questions around them. I've actually done another video that you may have seen on advanced training of setting up a sliding door. So first thing we want to focus on the doors that get created piece by piece, as in Smartbuild is building the door with standard wood or steel girts, maybe with a quick frame rail. So that's going to be the first part of the video today. And then the second part is going to be setting up sliding doors that you may buy as a kit. So it's more like an overhead door that we just got done setting up, where you're just buying this door as a kit, and then we have our trim and our framing going around the opening. So that'll be the last part of the session. So the first part, sliders, when you get into the setup wizard with our generic database and you get to the sliders section, it's going to be the first thing you see. And that can be a little bit confusing, as in, what are these? Are these not my standard sliding doors? And the first answer is they're not. In most cases, these are not the doors people are using, or not the way that we design sliders in Smartbuild. So again, these are kit items, and they have 3D visuals tied to them. So our focus mainly for this session is going to be, how do you get sliders set up in a way that Smartbuild, where it's actually applying wall sheeting, maybe even wainscot, pulling different parts and pieces into the model and building this slider according to the size you set. So when we look at this example, I have a sliding door, this large sliding door here. When I first placed this slider, my style, this is a standard. I'm choosing standard. So when you get in here, you select a style, it's a standard door. And the standard just means it's going to be framed by Smartbuild, and it'll have the sheeting applied. So when I look at these doors back here, these are the premium. And again, this visual is just showing crossbuck, so you could have all different kinds of visuals set up. But it's kind of like any other door. You have to have a door for each visual type set up as an OBJ file. So it's quite a bit more work. But for most part, setting up sliders, it's something like this. Most of our customers are doing a process like this, where yes, we just need to get all the parts in here, and it's using the standard style. And when we look at the settings, kind of take a preview, go into the door and window tab here on the right, and go down to the sliding door panel trim. And there's several settings in here. It can be a bit overwhelming, but just starting here and running through this really quick. So the top trim, so we're talking about the door panel itself. And I don't have any set to the top of my doors. It's no trim at all on the door panel itself. Now I do have track cover on the opening as opening trim, but that's a different setting. So the top trim, none. Bottom trim, I'm using a quick frame, a white quick frame, and I have that set to be my accent color 1. And that can be set up as a different color. If you set up these accent colors, you can control other items in the job. So that's how I did that. And every time that I run a sliding door, I always want that defaulted to show white, since that's my stock color of that rail that I buy. So the white bottom door rail, I set it to white. I could have links in there. The quick frame, the same case. I'm setting it to white. And H frame, if there's a split door, the center rail, I'm sure you have different names for it. And then the margins. So the margins can be a bit confusing, but the side margin affects the panel or the opening. So when we're setting this sliding door up, the question is, if you sell a 10-foot wide sliding door, how wide is that opening actually? And some people sell a 10-foot door as in the door panel itself is 10 feet. And if that's true, your settings would look something like this, where the side margin affects the opening instead of the panel. So correct myself here. If you're selling a 10-foot door and the panel is actually 10'3", your settings would look like this. If the opening itself is actually a lot less than 10 foot, maybe it's 9'6" by the time you have your jam board and all that, then your settings would look different. So that's what these settings are. You can do either way based off of what you have here. And then kind of getting into the opening trim. So we have the track cover going across the top here. You can set up the door track here. Now the reason I wanted to show this first is because these trims, they have to be in the trim category. All these parts that you see, H frame, quick frame, track cover, door track, they have to be items that were set up in the trim category for them to be usable in this area in the 3D model. So we're kind of skipping back to the trim section. And if you go back to trim, you may have noticed that those items were in there when you did your trim setup. So we have a track cover, and there's some quick frame bottom, and again, you could change these names: bottom rail, white quick frame. So the sliding, any parts that are going around a sliding door, you may think of them as sliding door hardware or slider hardware, but it's not really. So anything that needs to go in trim, you may have found in here already, and then that again, it needs to be in trim before you can set it to these settings. So that's just a quick FYI on that. But back to sliders themselves. So we're skipping over this area. We're not talking about these openings right now. We're talking about all the parts to create a slider that looks like this in the job. When we go to the job review and we go to sheeting, we've got our slider sheeting here. We've got our pieces. And when we go to trim, we see the trim for the sliding doors as in the quick frame, H frame, or whatever you name that trim. So that's what we're focusing on here as the first part. So back to the setup wizard, those trims, we would need to set them up following our standard trim processes. So if you don't have these in here, if you're not using the generic database for your setup, or if you need these, you just have to create them following the trim steps. So we need to add a trim item, put in your sliding door parts. And the thing to really note on this, as in things like door track. So if I find this door track, I think it's in the generic database here. If I can find the door track. So yes, here's the door track. And one common error that we see is people put their door track in as 6 different parts as in different lengths. We don't want to do that. We want to create one common SKU like we do for other trims, and then we have all the available lengths of that trim here. And then Smartbuild pulls the correct door track according to the length that it needs. So here, these are the lengths. We would set up the usages. It can be used for door track, and then what system it's part of. So if you're using it in case of metal, metal board and batten, anything that goes on the walls of your buildings, you would need to include this door track as part of that system. So that's how the door track gets set up, and other slider trims are very similar in that way. But moving on into the slider hardware, again, this generic database can really help you, as in giving you an example of what are slider hardware items. So again, I just have cam latches, door handles, things like here, the snugger, the collar, common items that we see. Again, you can take these items, you can delete all of them if you want, or you can add new items, create a SKU, a description, and again, same process. You can download this list, download the CSV file, look at this list, and add new hardware items by re-uploading the list and changing the parts that are there. So that's all optional. You can do that. I'll preview the sliding door list here. So here I have this slider hardware file. And again, here are the SKUs, just some generic SKUs that you can change and edit, change your price, your tax, change the name. But the reason I wanted to cover putting these parts in here is we look at, well, how do we get these items set up to actually show up in the job? And that's a really good question that comes up a lot. And when I look at this door here, we can automate the hardware that comes with it. So the side rails, the bottom rail, those are all trim items going in here. But what about the cam latches and all that? So snuggers, items like that come in as a package. And if I edit this, you notice that I have this slider hardware single split, and we can rename this. You can have it set up as a single package. But the main thing is we want to look at how these hardware packages could be set up. So going back over into the setup wizard, we're kind of jumping back and forth here, just trying to make sure we cover all the items. Going back into the settings and go to packages, we do have some generic packages there that you can look at that are using these hardware items. So when you go to packages and you go to slider, here we have a slider hardware bundle. And again, these are all items that it's using the generic database, and then minus some trim nails. If you need those or don't need those, you can delete them. But looking at some of these formulas, so we have a door handle, and it says if the panels are less than 2, use 1 door handle. If there's 2 panels, do 2. And that's basically just saying if it's a split door, do this, and if it's a single door, do that. So that's how most of these are working. It's doing the same thing for trolleys. And again, you may want to tweak some of these formulas. They're just in here to give you an example. And if you're curious of, well, what data do I have to work from, you can click this little icon here, and you can see all the different tokens that you can use to build this formula out. So that may be helpful. And we have more advanced training on packages, but just kind of giving you a preview of what it looks like and why we want to set up these hardware items within this section for sliding doors. So going back, looking at this package here, again, you can review this. If you don't need these items, you can delete this package out and start fresh, or maybe you don't need it at all. So that's the biggest thing, is understanding what those packages do and how you can set them up to get all the materials that you need in a job. So moving on to the last part of this demonstration here, talking about other types of sliding doors, as in the premium type that we were showing here. So when we look at this door, this is coming from a catalog of doors that I set up previously and put in my premium door class. So when you select a style, it would be a premium door, and then this is what shows up. So going back and looking at those items and those sliders that I have in here, I have several sizes. And again, these are just examples. Maybe you have a certain brand that you buy, different sizes. So when you look at these doors, you can see that they have a SKU, a description, a size, a selling unit, kind of like other items, maybe like doors and windows, other doors and windows that we put in already. So looking at these, they work very similar, as in when setting these up, when we go back to the settings and the doors and windows section here, there is a 3D model associated with each of these. So again, if you change these, if you add new ones, we do have to map a new 3D model to it. So looking at these, if I go to doors and windows and I go to sliders and I choose a 10x7 Dutch, if we open this up, we can see what these doors look like. And it's just a white and a generic gray color. If you would want to have different colors, the same principle applies as overhead doors, which we talked about before, where every color that you want, you would have to have another copy of this door showing each color. So we have to, if we want 5 colors, we have to have 5 versions of this door with a different part number for each color. And then you would have to have another 3D model associated with that. So we're not going to get into scaling this model, but just wanted to show you it is the same setup in the door and window side. So going back to the 3D model here, you can see we've covered both types of sliding doors. One other settings area that I wanted to cover was the color of the door. So in the sliding door panel sheeting, we have a slider wainscot, match main, and slider panel color wall. So these are some extra settings that we've added along the way, where if the door falls in an area that has wainscot, I have mine set to match the main, so it follows. If it needs wainscot, it adds wainscot. And if I raise that sliding door up, it actually leaves the wainscot off, so it's not needed. And then I can also control that sliding door with other colors in the job. So that's another control that you do have on sliding doors. So I want to thank you all for watching. I hope this helps, and we'll see you next time.